All right, I've brought a couple of books to share with you guys. The first one you may have already even heard from. It is called Healing with Poisons, Potent Medicines in Medieval China.
Mm.
So here's the book
Let's
here.
see what this one is. Yan Lu. I know that name. I've actually not seen this book, and I'm super curious.
Yeah, it just came out in 2021. And my main interest was the exploration of sort of the concept of dew or potency or poison, as we would translate it, and how that's kind of changed throughout history. But it seems to be this understanding from antiquity, and we see it in Latin in the words venenum or pharmacon, which also have kind of this dualistic meaning, taking us outside of something being an absolute poison and kind of bringing us back to like this earlier understanding of the energetics of the plant and how preparation and dosage and all of these things come into play to get the different effects. So I thought that was a really fascinating one. And then here is Poison Prescriptions by the Seed Sisters. So it kind of looks at a lot of those concepts as well. They're out of the UK, so the focus is on the nightshades, specifically henbane, datura, deadly nightshade. A really nice intro book to sort of the concept of working with some of these different plants.
That looks nice, yeah. It is interesting. Oddly enough, I've worked more with the Chinese poisonous plants than I have the Western ones. I've only worked with these a little bit that are in here. And one of the things, I mean, certainly when we look at the medicinal uses of some of those toxic ones in Western, they're usually more in the homeopathic range or slightly above if we're looking at yellow jessamine and things like that. They're just a pinch above homeopathics. Except for things like poke and a few of the others we still use in the more concrete therapeutic dosing of that. The Chinese is always interesting, and Bob's personal belief is that we've lost so much of our knowledge of Western because every culture uses poisonous plants traditionally, and usually by that higher level, what I talk about grandmother's medicine. If your kid was sick, we're not going to necessarily run to the stronger toxic plants, but those were reserve somebody who's done further training more often. But the part that's lost sometimes is the processing of those plants. It wasn't just like, oh, let's go pick this and throw it in some tea and slug it back. But the Chinese still preserve some of that traditional understanding of pao zhi, which is how it's picked, when it's picked, how it's sliced and dried, how it's heated to a particular temperature. When we look at things like Jack in the Pulpit in Chinese medicine, that we have two, unprocessed where it's just dried, another one that's stir-fried with the bile from a water buffalo. And that helps to detoxify it some. If we're looking at aconite, we have one where it's the main root, but we also will more commonly use the daughter root, that the side root that's considered less toxic. And then if that's processed properly, we actually use it as a tonic. So I feel like so much of that level of understanding of the plants, of its processing, and not detoxifying, but making it less toxic or to direct it into a particular direction. And I noticed in the Chinese herbal poisons book, the idea of using poison for poison, which is not as often talked about in the Chinese. And so the idea that for certain types of toxicity, what we would call liver yang rising or internal wind, we use the things like scorpion and centipedes specifically for seizure disorders and things like that are that excess heat. And nobody talks about those much. And also using the more toxic pieces are actually picked off of the scorpions, using the tail to enhance its effectiveness.
Nice. I'm glad you mentioned that.